You are hearing the peaceful sounds of Bull Creek. How's it going, everybody? Interpreter Ryan here, standing in beautiful Bull Creek in the heart of Humboldt Redwoods State Park. One of my favorite places to be of all time. It's getting probably in the high 70s, almost 80. I'm almost starting to break a sweat today. And it really feels like things are changing a little bit, like we're starting to move into the warmer time of year. The rainy season is over. And I just want to apologize in advance. I know that our connection's probably a little bit wonky today. I have pretty limited cell service here, and I'm surprised I was able to even jump on. But we're going to try to make it work. And this, wow, Jennifer, the Russian River, you know, that was where I grew up, right there in Santa Rosa, right near the Russian River. We used to go there all the time. Definitely not as clear and green as Bull Creek here, but still, I actually had a lot of good times in that river, floating down from maybe kind of where's that place that we would go? There's that campground near Geyserville, and we'd take an inner tube or some kind of raft and go all the way down to Healdsburg. It was like maybe a 16-mile run, and we had so much fun. And glad you can hear me well, and hello from Florida. Glad that you all can join. And I started this with and let me just start over again, just for those of you who just joined on. So my name is Ryan. I'm an interpreter here at Humboldt Redwood State Park, and I work for the larger North Coast Redwoods District. And for those of you who maybe haven't experienced these live streams, every day at 3 p.m. we are doing these live streams on Facebook to bring the parks to your home. I know for a lot of people it's really frustrating to not be able to get out to these parks, and it's just reminding us how important nature is in our lives. And I want to remind you that you are doing an act of compassion by sheltering in place. That a lot of these communities here around the Redwoods are places that are not equipped to have maybe as much of an influx of patients, and it can be especially the medical infrastructure here. So it really means a lot to keep these places as safe as they can because of the small communities. And so by as difficult as it can be, staying in place is an act of compassion. And so I think it's really important, and I commend you for doing that. And I want to do the best I can to bring this place into your home right now and give you a little bit of maybe a little respite from maybe the day-to-day life. So I started this with a question, which was, what does freshwater mean to you? And I already saw some people that responded to that question. And let me talk a little bit about the freshwater that I'm by, and then we'll kind of talk about why I picked that question. So I'm going to move, and hopefully we can stay somewhat stable in our connection. But Bull Creek is a source of some very fresh water, and it is a major tributary to the South Fork of the Eel River. It flows through the heart of Humboldt Redwood State Park, and it is an important habitat for Chinook salmon and steelhead trout and even some coho salmon. And this creek has gone through a lot of changes. This is kind of one of the earlier places that was protected within this park. It was a place that was almost completely logged. Let's just actually look above the river real quick so you can get a little sense of what I mean when I say it's getting logged. Let's see if I can actually activate my gimbal, if I know how to work this. Let's try this again. My buttons aren't working as well. Let's see, there we go. That's what we're talking about. So Bull Creek, by the way, Bull Creek Flats, this area where these redwoods are growing, is the world's tallest forest. There is no forest on Earth that has more trees as tall as this as anywhere on the planet. And so it's really important that this place was protected back in the early 1920s. It really started around 1918, and when the Save the Redwoods League was formed. And there were some really important people like Laura Mahan, which my colleague Griff might talk about, Laura Mahan, who was this really important person who lived in Humboldt County, who was the president of the Women Save the Redwoods League up here, as well as a member of the Women's Club and a California Federation. And she actually stood in front of equipment to prevent it from being logged while her husband James went up into Eureka to get an injunction to stop from logging. It was land that was in in discussion to be protected by the Save Redwoods League, and the companies were trying to cut the trees anyway, and she actually stood in the way. And because she was kind of high status, they didn't mess with her. They sort of let her stand in front of the equipment and protect the trees. And so this stream might have been a lot different if it didn't have all of these forests around it. The water might not be as fresh and might not be as clear. And there's been other events that have affected this creek, like the flood of 1955 and the flood of 64, which caused some huge landslides. This stream has changed a lot, but you can see that it still is very fresh and it is very clear, and it's something that we all need in our lives. And I see some people already giving us some ideas. Fresh water equals life for all. Number one sustaining element. I'm going to go back and see, there was another one that I saw. It means we have life. Water makes it possible for fire suppression, growing food, having a reliable source for drinking, as long as that source is safe for consumption. And let's see if I can add any more to that. Oh, let me go back here. Quite a bit there. I'm going to go back and read that and maybe respond to that. That was great. Water is really important, and especially fresh water. And you know, a lot of our fresh water is stored in ice. A lot of our fresh water is in polar ice or in glaciers. And really, you know, our planet is somewhere around 75% water. And only about, if I remember my water cycle here, only about 2% maybe is actually fresh water. The rest is salt water. So it's this really, really precious resource. And I want to ask you this question, since we started with that. I want to know, can somebody tell me where your water comes from? Where does your drinking water come from? Does anyone know their source of their water? And while I'm waiting for responses, you know, where I live, I actually live in the town of Arcata, which is about 45 minutes north of here, 45 miles north of here. And Arcata, our water source comes from the Mad River, and it's actually pumped from these pump stations over a mountain called Fickle Hill, and then brought down into the city. So it's actually pumped from wells, or from there's aquifers underneath that that river, and comes over. I see someone say Arrowhead Mountain, so maybe you live, I don't know exactly where that might be, unless you're getting your water from unless that was a joke about Arrowhead spring water. Some people say reservoirs from your well. So some people have access to their own water supply, which is always an important thing to be able to have, and was a necessity for a lot of people who may be living in areas that are arid. I grew up in Napa County, just sort of north of the San Francisco Bay, wine country, and I actually worked for a water company. That was my first job, was working for a municipal water company, and we had these reservoirs that provided water for the community. And when you start to think about where people's water comes from, you start to see why it's so important to protect the land around that water, because fresh water is going to be way easier to treat and to clean and make potable for you. And so what I learned from working at this water company, which was called the Howell Mountain Mutual Water Company, it was in the town of Angwin in the kind of the northeastern Napa Valley up in the mountains. Working there, I really realized how important it was to protect the land around the stream, something that we call the watershed. And if you haven't heard this term watershed, it doesn't mean a little building that holds water. It means the land that surrounds a stream. So the best way to describe a watershed, and I might have done this in one of my programs or in one of my talks before, is that it is a bowl. Like if you did this with your hands and you created a tiny little watershed, that means if I were to spray your hands with water, all that water is going to end up in that central crease, which is basically the river of your hands, and the edges of your hands are the mountain ranges. And so the watershed is this really significant place because it is the source of the water that gets concentrated into a body, like for example, a reservoir, or even sometimes a well if it's in an aquifer, like in the Central Valley, where all of that water is sometimes percolating under the ground and getting stored. Let's see. So I hear someone mentions a well, which is in a vein of the Florida aquifer. So in Florida, you might have aquifers where your water is stored. Colorado River. So at LA, it may be the Colorado River. However, there's also the Owens River from the Owens River Valley that is also a source of the water down in LA. It's piped over. And so fresh water is this thing that is really precious for a lot of people, and sometimes you have to get it from very, very far away to sustain the community. I asked you about the water near you, mainly because I want you to think about water sources and where they might be. They might be, and the fact that a stream or another, maybe a river or a reservoir, those are areas where you tend to have other natural processes happening, whether it's plants and animals that are living there, thriving off of that water source, migratory birds. So if you have the ability to visit some of those water sources where you're at, maybe even if it's just the mountains surrounding some of those reservoirs, a lot of times that's where you find parks and protected areas and open spaces, and you can kind of see how much when you turn the tap, that what comes out is really dependent on protected land around that water source. Because if you're in an area maybe where there's a lot of pollution, or there's not a lot of open space and it's just houses and urban density, it's not a great place to get water from. So they usually have to get water from out of those areas. If you wouldn't want to drink water that came right from a bunch of storm drains in the middle of LA, and you're also probably not going to be able to rely on sustaining that many people with the little amount of water that comes from that region. So I asked about freshwater just to kind of get you thinking about why water is so important to us. Obviously, it's important to a lot more than just us. It's important to migratory birds. It's important to our salmon that live in a lot of our coastal streams here in California. It's important for the animals that eat salmon. It's important for the trees that grow along our stream. And I'm just going to move down here just a little bit, get a little closer to the water. For me, fresh water is a place of peace and tranquility. It's a place to recharge. It's a place where I am able to reflect, no pun intended, on maybe simpler things that are valuable to me. And it kind of reminds me of why I want to protect the environment around these streams, that it's going to benefit me when I'm drinking. It's going to benefit other people, and it's going to benefit a lot of other living things. And I think the thing that I really want to just leave you with is the thought that no matter where you're at, you're in a watershed. There is some kind of water source near you, whether it's a seasonal stream, whether it's a creek that looks like an aqueduct running through LA, the LA River, that is all completely encased in concrete. Those are still important waterways, and they have a story to tell, and they come from a much larger area of land that surrounds that water source. And if you have any opportunity to visit some of your local waterways, to start to identify some of the creatures that live there, I would love to know if you find anything. I would love to know what is an important place in your, or what is an important species or an important habitat in your water source, or in the land surrounding your water source. I see someone saying that, Amanda saying, I love being near water, it improves my spirit. I completely agree with that. That's why people go to the ocean. That's why people stand next to waves, and why they want to visit waterfalls. There's a lot of energy that you can feel next to water. I think maybe I might do a second part of this next week, and maybe there'll be some more conversation about some of the things that you have. I guess maybe what I would like to see, if anyone who's on here right now, there's only a few of you right now, but if there's anyone on here right now, do you know of, is there a public land or a state park or a county park, or is there some kind of park that is near a water source or that protects a water source in your community? If you know of any, feel free to share in your comments right now of a park that protects a water source in your community, or at least part of it. You know, in where I grew up in Santa Rosa and in Sonoma County, and then eventually over into Napa County, where I moved when I was a little older. Like in Santa Rosa, we had a riverfront park near Hillsburg that protected a part of the Russian River. We had Austin Creek State Recreation Area, which protects maybe a couple thousand acres of the Austin Creek watershed. And then when I moved over to Napa Valley, there are places like Robert Louis Stevenson State Park, which protects Mount St. Helena, which is the source of one of the main sources of the Napa River. So I see someone mentioning the Lower Russian supports salmonids as well as a variety of other creatures. Armstrong Woods, of course, Armstrong Redwoods. That's one of my favorite spots down there. Lake Cachuma County Park in Santa Barbara. Oh, yeah, okay, exactly, yeah. And I've been to some of those areas down in Santa Barbara. There's some really beautiful parks up there on the mountains there. Half Moon, Austin Creek. Yep, as I mentioned, yeah, Austin Creek, 6,000 acres. Beautiful place to camp, even a good place to backpack too. When this is all over, that is a spot that I'd like to get going to. Lots of marine preserves here in Southern California. So yeah, so saltwater environments being protected by the marine protected areas. So, Silver Springs, or if you could talk about, really, like, think about the designated wildernesses that we have in the United States, where we protect hundreds of, well, really millions and millions of acres in wilderness areas, like whether it's the Ventana Wilderness Area near Big Sur, or whether it is the Trinity Alps near me that protects the headwaters of the rivers that feed the Trinity River, whether it's Mount Shasta protecting the San Joaquin River, the Sacramento River, or a lot of the wilderness areas that protect the Sierra Nevada mountains. A lot of those wilderness areas, part of the reason they're there is to protect the water supply, to protect the water source, and all of those places depend on that snowpack to feed that water supply. So I've really enjoyed this. This is great. I'm loving the conversation that we've had about freshwater, and it's an important part of our survival. Obviously, we're 3/4 water, and so is our planet. So I think I just want to end on this note, which is thank you so much for your comments and for your feedback, and also thank you so much for your compassionate action, which has been to continue to shelter in place. And I know that it's hard, and I know that everyone is really eager to get out to these places, and I know it can be frustrating at times. I hope that you remember the small things. For example, the importance of fresh water, the importance of fresh air, and I hope that you'll take this time to try to connect with some of those areas around you, and try to maybe get to know a couple different plants and animals you've never learned about that are in your area. Because every place, whether it's in an area that is an arid desert, whether it's in a Arctic tundra, or whether it's maybe in a parking lot of a Walmart, there's something natural there. There's something is breaking through, something is using that space in one way or another. There's always beauty to be found. So thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I hope that you're staying safe, and I can't wait to see you all here in our parks in the near future. Keep joining us for these live streams, and stay hydrated. All right, everyone. Have a great one. Please enjoy this last view of Bull Creek.